El Salvador was once infamous for being the murder capital of the world. Its streets were dominated by ruthless gangs, its prisons overflowing with violence and chaos. But today the narrative is shifting quite dramatically. This tiny Central American nation has implemented one of the harshest prison systems globally. A controversial yet undeniably effective approach that has dramatically reduced gang activity in the country. Meanwhile, thousands of miles north, the United States struggles with its own gang violence and overcrowded prisons. This has led American policymakers and the President of the United States, Donald Trump, to a very unlikely strategy: deporting illegal immigrants, including suspected gang members, directly to El Salvador's prisons. And this decision has been controversial. It has sparked intense debate and raised significant concerns over the legality, ethics, and human rights of this decision. Yet a lot of this has gone under the radar. While headlines have been covering the stock market crash, the tariffs, as well as Iran, this whole system has gone almost completely unnoticed by the average American. So of course I have some questions, and we're going to try to answer some of them in this video. How did El Salvador transform its prison system, and how does that method compare to that of the United States? More critically, what are the human rights and legal implications of America's new deportation policy, and is sending migrants into El Salvador's notoriously severe prison condition an acceptable and even sustainable solution? To answer these questions, we'll explore the gritty reality inside and outside of El Salvador's prison walls, contrast those with the US prison system, and unpack the geopolitical implications of this current policy. If this sounds interesting to you, then stick around and put a like on this video. El Salvador's struggle with gang violence has deep roots tracing back decades. The two most notorious gangs, Mara Salvatrucha, also called MS-13, and 18th Street Gang, or Barrio 18, originated in Los Angeles in the 1980s. They were formed by Salvadorian immigrants seeking protection from the city's current gang culture. However, following the end of El Salvador's Civil War in 1992, many gang members were deported back into El Salvador, inadvertently transplanting U.S. gang culture and MS-13 and these gangs back into a nation ill-prepared to manage the problem. This influx contributed significantly to the proliferation of gang activity within El Salvador. In response to escalating gang violence, successive Salvadorian governments implemented hardline policies. Notably, the early 2000s saw the introduction of mano dura, called Iron Fist, and super mano dura, or super Iron Fist strategies. And by the way, calling it super Iron Fist just sounds like a cartoon punch, which emphasizes mass incarcerations and military policing. Despite their aggressive approach, these policies yielded limited successes and were criticized for exacerbating prison overcrowding without effectively curbing gang influence. A pivotal shift occurred in March of 2022 when President Nayib Bukele's administration declared a state of exception following a surge in homicides. This emergency measure led to the suspension of certain constitutional rights, including the right to legal counsel and the requirement to inform individuals of reasons for their arrest. The decree facilitated mass arrests around the country, with over 83,000 individuals detained by December 2024, many without formal charges or due process. To accommodate the swelling population, the government inaugurated the Terrorism Confinement Center, or CECOT, in early 2023. Located in Tecoluca, approximately 70 kilometers southeast of San Salvador, this mega prison was designed to house up to 40,000 inmates. Each cell, intended for around 100 prisoners, is equipped with absolute minimal amenities: 2 sinks and 2 toilets, creating extremely austere conditions within the facility. While Bukele's administration touts these measures as instrumental in reducing crime rates, they have drawn sharp criticism from human rights organizations. Reports highlight severe overcrowding, inadequate access to legal representation, and allegations of mistreatment and torture within the prison system. Furthermore, the broad criteria for arrests have led to detention of individuals with tenuous or no links to gang activity, raising concerns about the erosion of civil liberties and the potential for systemic abuses under the guise of national security. Under President Nayib Bukele's administration, El Salvador has also adopted the implementation of zero-tolerance policies. Since the declaration of the state of exception in March 2022, these policies have led to the arrest of over 85,000 individuals accused of gang affiliations by March 2025, representing approximately 1.8% of the entire country's population. detainees are frequently held without formal charges, and access to legal representation and family visits has been severely restricted. In maximum security facilities like CECOT, families and lawyers are entirely denied access to prisoners, effectively isolating them from external contact. The Salvadorian government reports significant reduction in homicide rates, attributing this decline to its aggressive anti-gang strategies. Official data indicates that by the end of 2024, the homicide rate had dropped to 1.9 per 100,000 inhabitants, positioning El Salvador among the countries with the lowest homicide rates in all of Latin America. However, these measures have drawn substantial criticism from human rights organizations. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have documented widespread violations, including arbitrary arrests and enforced disappearances, as well as even torture. Reports highlight that many detainees have been imprisoned without due process at all, and there have been allegations of inhumane treatment within the detention facilities. Critics argue that the government's approach undermines fundamental human rights and the rule of law, raising concerns about the long-term implications for Salvadorian society. The lack of transparency in reporting and restricted access to detention centers have made it extremely challenging to independently verify the government's claims regarding the crime reduction. Observers caution that while the immediate decrease in homicides is notable, the sustainability of such gains is uncertain if achieved at the expense of civil liberties and human rights. Obviously, this all creates a very interesting situation for Salvadorians to ask themselves, with the main question being, is it worth it to sacrifice civil liberties in exchange for security? There's one American founding father that had some commentary on this specific question, but that's just his opinion. However, all of this is to set the stage for what comes next. The U.S. sending illegal immigrants to these prisons. Obviously, things are about to get a lot more complicated. But first, let's contrast the Salvadorian prison system with that of the United States to get an idea of where we are. The United States operates a multifaceted prison system comprising of federal and state facilities, each governed by distinct jurisdictions and policies. Federal prisons house individuals convicted of federal offenses, while state prisons confine those convicted of state crimes. Beyond traditional incarceration, the U.S. maintains a separate network for immigration detention, managed by agencies like Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, to detain individuals awaiting immigration proceedings and deportation. Since Trump entered office and began his widespread deportation campaign, additional camps have been built, notably with one in Guantanamo Bay, to accommodate the influx of individuals being deported. A notable aspect of the U.S. correctional landscape is the utilization of private detention centers. As of 2022, approximately 90,873 individuals, representing roughly 8% of the total state and federal prison population, were incarcerated in privately operated prisons. These institutions are often criticized for prioritizing profit over inmate welfare, leading to concerns about substandard conditions and inadequate rehabilitation programs. In the context of due process and legal rights, the U.S. criminal justice system is founded on constitutional protections. Individuals accused of crimes, including gang-related offenses, are entitled to legal representation, fair trial, protections against unlawful searches and seizures. Similarly, individuals suspected of terrorism are afforded due process rights, though certain measures, such as the use of special administration measures, can impose restriction on communication and confinement conditions in the interest of national security. Also note that illegal immigrants also get some protections, including the right to due process, right to be with family, and the right against unreasonable searches and seizures. The U.S. addresses gang-related crimes through comprehensive strategies encompassing investigation, prosecution, and sentencing. Law enforcement agencies employ specialized units to infiltrate and dismantle gang organizations, while prosecutors may leverage statutes like the Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act, or RICO, to pursue convictions. Sentencing often involves lengthy prison terms, especially for violent offenses or significant drug trafficking charges. Rehabilitation and reintegration programs are integral to the U.S. correctional approach, aimed at reducing recidivism, especially among former gang members. These initiatives offer educational opportunities, vocational training, and substance abuse treatment. Studies indicate that participation in such programs can decrease the likelihood of reoffending by up to 43%. Despite these efforts, the effectiveness of these rehabilitation programs varies, and challenges persist in ensuring consistent program quality and accessibility across facilities nationwide. Regarding gang-related crime rates, data from National Youth Gang Survey estimated approximately 850,000 gang members exist across the United States, marking an 8.6 increase over the previous year. So while the U.S. has a framework for combating gangs, gangs continue to grow nationwide, and that's become a major problem. Terrorism-related offenses are managed under a strict legal framework that's designed to balance national security with constitutional protections. Individuals accused of terrorism face prosecution primarily in federal courts under laws such as the U.S. Patriot Act, the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act, and various statutes addressing material support for terrorist organizations. And yes, terrorists do get legal protections and rights in court. Suspects charged with terrorism maintain due process rights, including the right to legal representation, a public trial by a jury, and protection against unlawful search and seizure. However, authorities frequently implement special measures, such as the special administration measures that I mentioned before, that limit communication between suspects and the outside world to prevent the potential facilitation of future attacks. Those convicted typically face severe sentencing, often involving life imprisonment without parole, particularly for crimes that result in the death or significant harm of individuals. High-profile terrorist suspects might also be placed in maximum security prisons like the ADX Florence Supermax prison, which is designed specifically to house inmates considered to be national security threats. These institutions strictly control inmate interactions, movements, and communications to minimize risk. While the U.S. approach remains firmly rooted in legal protections and judicial oversight, and employs rigorous and sometimes controversial security measures to manage individuals convicted of terror-related offenses. Now, why am I mentioning terrorism and the U.S. legal system that covers terror charges? MS-13, a massive Salvadorian gang that I mentioned earlier, was designated as a foreign terrorist organization, meaning that law enforcement and other parts of the government, like the military and the intelligence community, get a whole new pot of cash and a set of authorities around them to go after these groups. Well, so far it appears that FBI, ICE, and DHS have handled MS-13. They too get extra authorities and cash. When comparing the U.S. and El Salvadoran prison systems, several critical distinctions emerge. The U.S. emphasizes constitutional protections and due process, ensuring that individuals, regardless of their charges, have access to legal representation and fair trial, even whenever it's a group that's designated as a foreign terrorist organization like MS-13 and other gangs. In contrast, El Salvador's recent state of exception has led to the suspension of certain constitutional rights, resulting in mass arrests without formal charges and limited access to legal counsel. As of March 2024, El Salvador recorded an incarceration rate of 1,659 individuals per 100,000 inhabitants, which is the largest globally. In comparison, the U.S. incarceration rate stood at 541 per 100,000 people, highlighting a significant disparity in the imprisonment practices. U.S. prisons, despite challenges, offer various rehabilitation and reintegration programs aimed at reducing recidivism. Conversely, reports from El Salvador indicate severe overcrowding and allegations of human rights abuses within its prison facilities, with limited emphasis on rehabilitation. So if you're going to jail, and personally I would recommend not going to jail, if you are going to go to jail, then go somewhere in Europe. But if you have to choose between either the United States or El Salvador, I'd say the U.S. if you can. But don't go to jail. Now, we've already mentioned ICE. ICE oversees a network of detention facilities used to hold individuals pending immigration proceedings or deportation. These facilities include ICE detention centers, contracted private facilities, and even county jails. As of early 2025, ICE manages over 200 detention centers all across the country, with many detainees held in county or local jails that contract with ICE. Conditions within these facilities have been subject to concern and criticism. Reports have highlighted issues such as inadequate medical care, overcrowding, and instances of abuse. For example, the Irwin County Detention Center in Georgia faced allegations in 2020 of performing non-consensual medical procedures on female detainees, leading to the termination of its contract with the government. Now, with a larger deportation program, overcrowding is more likely now than before and is now likely a major risk that ICE is managing, and that's probably why we see such an incremental approach to the mass deportation so far. Not only do they lack the personnel and the aircraft to just deport en masse, these folks have to be held briefly while they're tried and processed, and while they're being held, they have to be held in conditions that are appropriate, and that likely governs and constrains the rate of deportation. In response to the increased enforcement action, the Trump administration has sought to expand its detention capacity. Negotiations have been reported with various countries all around the world to accept migrants deported from the United States, aiming at alleviating domestic detention burdens. Of course, this includes the invitation by El Salvador to take some of the U.S.'s most violent offenders, specifically members of MS-13 or other gangs. This deportation process typically begins with apprehension by individuals by ICE, followed by detention in an immigration facility. Detainees are then entitled to certain legal rights, including the right to hire an attorney, though the government is not obligated to provide them with one. They also have the right to a hearing before an immigration judge, where they can contest their removal. Under the Trump administration, significant policy changes have affected deportation practices. The expansion of expedited removal allows immigration agents to deport individuals without a formal hearing if they were unable to prove their lawful presence within the U.S. Additionally, the administration invoked the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to facilitate the rapid deportation of individuals suspected of gang affiliation, particularly members of organizations designated as foreign terrorist organizations or FTOs, such as MS-13 or Tren de Aragua, which is a Venezuelan gang. Individuals accused or suspected of being part of FTO-designated gangs, including both illegal migrants and illegal U.S. residents, have faced stringent measures. The designation of MS-13 as an FTO has enabled the government to employ enhanced enforcement tactics, leading to the detention and deportation of alleged members. Notably, this has included the use of the Alien Enemies Act that has facilitated the deportation of individuals to countries like El Salvador that we've discussed, where they are often placed in high-security prisons, such as CECOT, which we've already talked about. As one example that you may or may not have heard of, one Maryland resident, Abrego Garcia, was mistakenly deported to El Salvador back in March of 2025, despite having been granted legal protection from deportation in 2019 due to credible fears of gang persecution. ICE alleged that he was affiliated with MS-13, a claim that him and his attorneys have disputed. His deportation was later deemed an administrative error by the White House, and legal proceedings have ensued to address the mistake. This case has even made it all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. However, there is more to this case, and at least at the time of this recording on April 9th, he still has not been sent back to the United States. Though he is expected to return to the U.S. once the Supreme Court finally rules over this case, which they may have already done by the time you're watching this video. One Venezuelan asylum seeker and makeup artist, Andre Hernandez Romero, was deported to El Salvador under the Alien Enemies Act without a court hearing. He is accused of gang affiliation based on tattoos and social media activity, and he was imprisoned in CECOT despite having no criminal record and credible asylum claims. His attorney expressed grave concerns for safety, highlighting the lack of due process in his case. So remember how Trump previously invoked the Alien Enemies Act? Well, under this directive, approximately 238 individuals have been deported so far to El Salvador and detained specifically in CECOT. Notably, many of these deportees have lacked apparent criminal records or concrete evidence linking them to actual gang activities. The administration also leverages the FTO designations on MS-13 and other gangs to facilitate the transfer of these detainees to foreign prisons. By classifying groups like MS-13 and Tren de Aragua as FTOs, the government expanded its legal framework to target individuals associated with these organizations, enabling their expedited removal and detention abroad. The utilization of the Alien Enemies Act in this context has also sparked significant legal debate. Critics argue that applying this wartime statute to peacetime immigration enforcement exceeds presidential authority and undermines constitutional due process protections. Legal challenges have mounted, questioning the applicability and the administration's broad interpretation. Human rights organizations have also expressed grave concerns regarding the treatment of deportees to Salvadorian prisons, and we've already discussed all of that. So what does all of this mean for the United States going forward, and why does any of this actually matter? The invocation of the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 by the Trump administration to deport individuals suspected of gang affiliations has had some significant legal challenges. The Supreme Court did rule in favor of the administration's use of the act, but emphasized that deportees must be given notice and the opportunity to challenge their removals, indicating that a legal battle is currently ongoing. Domestically and internationally, these deportation practices have attracted criticism criticism, potentially tarnishing the U.S.'s human rights reputation. The Guardian editorial board warned that measures initially aimed at undocumented migrants now threaten legally residing individuals, suggesting a broader erosion of civil liberties here in the United States. As alternatives, policymakers may consider comprehensive immigration reform focused on due process and human rights, enhanced cooperation with international bodies to address gang violence at its roots, and investment in domestic rehabilitation programs to reduce recidivism among gang-affiliated individuals. And of course, tied with this is a more comprehensive immigration reform. However, all of this would take a lot of time and effort as well as bipartisanship, and you just know we're not going to be getting that. As for El Salvador, the influx of deportees, particularly those alleged to be gang members, places additional strain on El Salvador's already burdened prison system. The terrorism confinement center that we've been talking about, designed to house up to 400,000 inmates, already faces significant overcrowding and resource limitations. The transfer of individuals to facilities like CECOT, known for their harsh conditions, raises ethical concerns about the well-being of those individuals post-deportation. Financially, detaining additional individuals also imposes additional costs for El Salvador. Reports indicate that the U.S. has agreed to pay El Salvador approximately $6 million to house the 238 Venezuelan gang suspects just for 1 year. That equates to roughly $25,000 per detainee. This amounts to a 43% discount compared to average U.S. prison costs, and this indicates that this is a cost-saving measure for the United States, but a potential financial and infrastructural burden on El Salvador. El Salvador was once infamous for being the murder capital of the world, but now things have changed. Things appear to be moving in a much more peaceful direction, and its prison system is one of the most controversial, yet apparently one of the more effective prison systems, at least in Latin America, if not the world. Meanwhile, thousands of miles north, the United States is struggling with its own gang violence and overcrowded prisons. And this is leading policymakers and the president to their new strategy, just deporting illegal migrants and suspected gang members just straight into El Salvador's prison. And all of this has led to the controversy and the debate on the legality, the ethics, and the human rights questions that we've all talked about in this video. Ultimately, this is a very complex issue, and there's a little bit more to it than what we've just talked about in this video. However, it definitely is clear that the priorities for the United States have shifted to a much more harsh stance on gangs and a zero-tolerance policy for anybody even potentially affiliated with them. And this is also an opportunity for El Salvador to step up and increase their profile within all of Latin America. But with all that said, let me know what you think about this. Do you think that all of this is the right move for the United States? And if not, what do you think that the US should do differently? Like this video if you found it interesting, and share it with a friend that you think might also find this interesting. Subscribe for more analysis on this and other international affairs topics. With all that, I'll see y'all next time. Later.